Next up, just a real cornucopia of talent we have walking on stage. We have the showrunner creators of Hacks, but not only are they the showrunner creators, they are the writers, directors, actors, producers, Lucia Aniello, Paul Downs, and Jen Statsky. Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi there.
How are you?
You two are opposites.
I know, yeah.
It's a nice bracket.
Yeah.
Well, so I think probably a lot of you have seen this season and of Hacks, and yeah, I knew they were going to do that, so that's why I said it.
Thank you.
But I knew because I have, when you work on things when they are in the water in culture, it just feels a different way. And I just have had people coming up to me for the past couple of weeks just saying how extraordinary this season has been. And as you all know, for the third season of a show to kind of hit like that, it's rare. And I wanted to talk to you all about why that happened this season, because I do think it's special. And I want to start with this question, which is, when you get a comedic dynamic that's working between the stars of a show, and you kind of traditionally milk that, for lack of a better word, and to change that, you risk alienating what people think is fun about the show and why they come week after week. But something you all have been unafraid to do, and in this season I really feel pushed further than ever, is change that dynamic between Ava and Deborah. And so I wanted you to just talk about, how do you think about that in the writer's room, about that change up?
Yeah, when we pitched this show, we always said that their relationship was this constant push-pull and one step forward, two steps back.
Sometimes three or four.
Sometimes 3 or 4, yeah.
It's a cha-cha.
And so it's baked into this relationship that it is a very difficult, constantly shifting, there's many layers on it. It's boss-employee, it's mentor-mentee, it's Gen Z, millennial cusp, boomer. There's so much friction there. And so we always knew there wouldn't be stasis. We always knew that what would make it exciting to watch is this balance of these very different viewpoints and different women, even if they are alike in many ways. And so I think comedically, you're right that there's a history of sitcoms where you do 22 episodes a year for 7 seasons and the dynamic never changes. I think there are things baked into their characters that always stay the same. They always, whether they're getting along or not, there's always, to use a term you use that we now use all the time, grist for the mill, so to speak. They're always butting heads about something, and sometimes it's relationship shifting and huge, big things, and sometimes it's as simple as why do you always wear pants? So it's that's baked in, and that will always be the case, but the dynamics of their larger relationship and where they're at, I think, have always been meant to shift since the initial conception of the show.
Well, I think what was interesting for me, though, this season was, I think you kind of saw 2 shifts. One, which was this season, they're getting along in a lot of ways, which is kind of dangerous for drama and driving story. I mean, honestly, it is. But I think what you all kept alive inside of that was this tension with them about the larger cultural conversation. And they're often on either side, with Deborah begrudgingly, slowly acknowledging that some of what she's always considered being funny just isn't anymore, and how she has to kind of own that and change. But then in the final episode, it's a sea change, and there's a real upending of that. I assume you all knew, when you got in the writer's room on day 1, that was going to be the last moment of the season.
I think we knew that we were going to have this Herculean task of trying to get the late night chair for Deborah, but I think it was the first week of the writer's room that we said, and Ava's going to take it. She's going to take power, and it's going to be a betrayal at the end. So I think that happened very early. But it was something that wasn't in our initial pitch. It was something that we thought, this is a good way to, exactly as you say, reset their dynamic and make it change and allow us to have that tension and that grist in the next season, but in a whole new way.
And in a way, both of the characters, they were getting along because Deborah was, had a goal, and she needed Ava for that goal, so she's going to be nice to Ava. And Ava kind of throws away so much of her life for Deborah because she believes that Deborah has changed enough to know that she'll do the right thing when push comes to shove, and she almost did. And the moment in the end when she didn't really forces Ava to ask herself, what do I think I deserve, and how do I get it? And if she is truly the mentee that has been paying attention, she's learned the lessons she's needed to learn to take it in a very Deborah Vance way, which we do feel will, of course, change the dynamic. And I think to what Jen was speaking to earlier, it is always this balance of who are these people at their core and how much have they changed, and what does that change for their comedic voice, but also what does that change for what they think they want and what they think they deserve. And so it was a really challenging season in some ways because you wanted to make sure that Ava felt like she wasn't just taking a back seat and then that was just it. Like she was taking a bit of a back seat because she felt, oh, well, I'll be getting the front seat soon. And when she's not given that, it kind of forces her to ask a lot of questions of herself. And in the end, she said, I'm going to blackmail you. So that's what you did.
Well, and it's interesting because I want to talk now a little bit about how you all represent women and ambition. And I think that some people have shorthanded the end of the season as all about Eve. And I don't think that's true because in that, that is really about women aging, youth, beauty, power, diminishing power that comes for women with age. And I think in this case, this is a bare knuckle brawl about power and ambition that is, you could easily see men having with each other and jockeying in position. So I'm just curious, but what was unique to women, I feel, is the moment where Ava is looking at her crying, saying, how could you do this? You know that we are what make you you. And that kind of emotional vulnerability. And I just think it's very complicated and juicy. So I guess, how do you all think about that as you're charting her race for the chair and kind of in a fun way, all eyes are on that, but there's, a real earthquake of this relationship as a result of ambition.
Yeah, I think yes, it would be too simplistic to just say the end is a move where Ava is just like trying to take something for the sake of feeling she deserves it and ambition. Of course, Ava is super ambitious, believes she deserves it, but it's deeper than that because, like you're saying, the we makes Deborah who she is. Ava doesn't just want to be head writer just to be head writer. She wants to be Deborah's head writer, and she knows the show will be the best version of the show if they do it together. And so it's such a complicated move, but she's doing this awful, let's call it, thing to Deborah for Deborah's own good. She really believes that. So it is not just ruthless ambition for the sake of ambition. Of course she's being ambitious. Of course she's going after what she wants, but she's doing it out of a real love and respect for Deborah and a love and respect for their creative collaboration. And yeah, it wouldn't have, that moment you speak of in that amazing scene in Deborah's living room where she's confronting her. She's realizing that Deborah cannot meet her on her level. She will not speak Ava's language of perhaps emotional intelligence. And so she goes, okay, I'll speak your language because we're not going away from each other.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good, Jen. That's right. That's good. That's right.
I've had some time to think about it.
Yeah. Paul, another woman who was quite ambitious this season is Kayla. And you were dealing with her swings for the fences, both when they connected and when there were real foul balls. So I just, I think that you all had so many just kind of delightful, really new, fresh scenes for you two with a lot more kind of depth to them, frankly. It wasn't just a comedic dynamic. There was real pain in your relationship, and you got to see levels of Kayla, of Meg, that you'd never seen before. What was that like, kind of stepping up to that this season?
I mean, it almost felt like these two characters, which have served as a real comic duo, they are the Abbott and Costello of the show. It was really interesting because it was the most hacks they've ever been, because there were those more heartfelt moments in addition to the hard comedy. And I have to tell you, it was so gratifying not only to do it because I got to play a different gear for my character, but also watching Meg do the same thing. I mean, there's a scene in the final episode in Bulletproof in the finale where, you know, she's advocating for herself and she's hurt. And she was just like, I mean, when the camera's on her, I'm just like tearing because I'm like, she moved me so much because it's, you know, it's that thing of a sad clown. You know, when you see someone like Kayla who is so funny, so comedic, and then to be vulnerable and to be hurt is just, there's something extra touching about that. And she was so good. And I think it was, you know, a testament to how many layers she has. And it was really great that because it's now the third season, we got to explore that for both of these characters and for all of the ensemble. I feel like everyone in the ensemble got to stretch a little bit more.
For sure. You know, just to talk about the direction of the show for a minute, the show is so beautifully shot, and I just want to compliment, you know, you all on just kind of the scope. And we've had the pleasure in the past couple weeks of seeing episodes up on movie screens, and it totally holds up. And so I think that it's been such a road show for you all, and that's been, you know, it's been location, and I think probably next season that's going to be different because you're in the chair and on the stage. And so I'd love to hear kind of, you know, you talking about both and what you're, you know, kind of some of the high points this season, but what you're excited about next season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of the show has been in these beautiful, expansive places. Vegas is such a visually stimulating place to shoot. And then we did season 2 on the road and really tried to capture a certain kind of a Americana that was kind of through the eyes of Deborah. But I think this season it will inevitably be a little bit more in LA and a little bit more in an office. But I think what's kind of interesting about that is the pressure cooker of what it's like to make a show night after night after night, especially the pressure cooker of 2 people who perhaps will have some grist for the mill, Sarah. So for us, I think it's like trying to use that to our advantage. Because yes, we've all seen shows shot in offices and in LA, but how do you make that feel different? And what is the hacks version of that? And I think that will be interesting just because of its limitations. And I really like when our show and we are kind of pressured by like producerial limitations, because it really forces us to say like, what is important about this with this space or this scene or whatever it is? How can we push ourselves and still make it feel unique and different and exciting? And I actually think sometimes limitations out of that bears the most exciting innovation, because it just forces you to think beyond your first thought.
Yeah.
And so for us, I think, you know, it's I think exciting to be like, how can this be us and different and still beautiful? And that's the other thing, that it is a comedy first and foremost, but we really try to make it feel like it can still, we hope that it still can feel beautiful and unique and different, and yet still have the reality that I think is required for comedy to feel relatable. So that is something that we're constantly thinking about and talking about. And, you know, comedy, now I'm getting too into it, but you guys are producers, you know the deal. You'll understand this in a way no one else could. But, you know, typically comedy like lives in the performances, and so you're so used to being like, let's cross shoot this so the performances feel alive and fresh, but we also sometimes want to still have, retain the beauty of stuff, which sometimes cross-shooting doesn't lend itself to. So sometimes we do cross-shoot, sometimes we don't, sometimes we block things in a way so that we can cross-shoot, but it still feels beautiful. So these are things that we're constantly considering and thinking about beyond story and tone and the visual language, but it's something that's constantly being dialed in with every shot and every scene.
You know, another aspect of the show that I think people find endlessly exciting and charming is the incredible, not only supporting cast, but also guest actors that come. And I'd love to kind of, you know, hear how much you write for people in mind at this point when you're creating parts, and then people that have been surprises. And then also, again, for next season, it's going to be so interesting having, you know, who are going to be the guests on the show, and what are kind of going to be the rules and thoughts and creative excitement behind all that.
Yeah, we certainly, we love writing for actors. There's so many wonderful people that we are fans of, and when we started the show, for example, like Caitlin Olsen, we loved her. We were such a huge fan of hers. We were like, if we could ever get her to play DJ, that would be amazing. And so that was a role that was very specifically written for her, and you hope and pray they'll say yes, and she did. And we do that, it's kind of a split. Like that happens a lot with guest actors that we've been really lucky to identify and say, oh, they would be really great and wonderful for this. And then we also just love casting off of auditions and tapes and finding people that way. And so I think casting is one of our like great joys of making the show. We really feel drawn to it. We sometimes are like, should we be casting directors?
And sometimes we think of an actor and we're like, what would be a funny character for this person, because we just love them so much, and that also, it can inspire in so much.
Yeah.
Were you gonna say something? I felt like you were.
You said it.
You
said
lifted the
exactly
mic.
what I was gonna
Really?
say, yeah.
Oh my God, that's sick.
See, this is how they work. It's like the mind meld supreme. Another thing that I think people have loved about the show is your portrayal of LGBTQ characters, and obviously telling stories about their lives that involve kind of their identities, but then in many ways disregarding those identities and just telling their stories as people on the planet without it being freighted in every storyline. And I think people really have appreciated both. You kind of do a mix of that. And I think especially with Ava and Deborah, there's always a dance about dipping in and out. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the show, obviously identity politics are a huge part of the show, partly because of Ava and Deborah's point of view on certain things. But yeah, when we were first pitching the show, it was a character study of this woman, this legendary stand-up from Vegas, but also her ecosystem and all the people in her world, which a lot of those people would probably be queer people. And in telling those stories, we really, as you say, didn't want to make their identity be the thing that preceded the character or preceded the story. It was their lives, their ups, their downs, their joys and their sadness, as fully formed, fully fleshed out characters. And and then there are some times when we really explore queer stories, like when we're on the lesbian cruise and we have a talk about how people arrive at their queerness, or this season when Marcus goes to Palm Springs Pride and talks a lot about fandom and what it means for queer audiences to find their queens, their divas, like Deborah. And that's something that we feel is an important story to tell, and one that we can uniquely tell because of Deborah and all of the people in her orbit. Yeah,
I mean, I think that an episode rather, that I was really taken with and thought about a lot was the episode when she goes and addresses the college class, and the whole idea about not apologizing for a joke and that whole conversation. And I can't think of a more topical conversation in entertainment. And so part one of the question, oh God, we have 24 seconds. Okay, this is the only question and there will be no part two. But I think I'd love to hear kind of in the writer's room, how you all talked about what the dialogue should be around not apologizing for a joke.
Well, what's so funny is that, and I'm going to talk really fast now. What's so funny is that was actually part of our original pitch in 2019. And it's so interesting that that's become that much more like part of our cultural conversation, the idea that you don't apologize for a joke. But in the room, we talked a lot about, what is Deborah's responsibility to jokes? They are jokes. And, I think they all, feed into a kind of cultural punching down of certain groups of people, minorities and women, whatever marginalized group. And so for us, we really wanted to make sure that we understood both sides, which is it was a joke and it was a long time ago and everybody was doing it and I was progressive in so many other ways. So why are they coming after me at this really important time in my career? But also to Ava's point and the students' point, they were hurtful. They did not help people in any way and it was punching down. So the responsibility that a comedian has to their own material, I don't think we're necessarily saying that it's black or white of you should apologize or you shouldn't apologize, but I think we kind of land on, well, how do you feel right now about your material, like honestly? And we ended up kind of leaving that as the main crux. And to Deborah at that point in her life and the way that she's able to look back on her material, she does feel badly about it. And she wouldn't do those jokes today. And so that, since that is her truth, we did feel like it was honest that this character, we're not saying that many comedians of this age would necessarily do this, but for us and the journey we put our character through, we feel like at this moment she would apologize. Yeah.
Yeah, we and I think that like what Lucia was saying about not punching down, I think for us, like our comedy philosophy is very rooted in that. Like in some ways it's very much as simple as just make sure the target of the joke is a deserving target. And I think we also wanted to explore the phenomenon happening around when people are saying never apologize for a joke, why should I have to apologize? A lot of these comedians want the privilege without the responsibility. They want this enormous stage, they want this microphone, they want to be able to put anything out into the world but then have no responsibility for how those words land on someone. And so I think that's why we had Ava say, you get to be rich and famous and make jokes, and they get to have their reactions. It's even though it is a person standing on stage and everyone else listening to them, it is still a dialogue. It is still your relationship in the world. You have to consider what you say and how it lands on people. And I think it makes you a better comedian to do that because you're listening, and then your material can evolve and you can be responding to the world in real time rather than siloing yourself off saying, well, this is what I think and I don't want to hear anyone's reactions. And so, like Lucia said, it perhaps a bit of a fantasy the way Deborah reacts, but we hope not. We hope someone can react that way.
Well, and just as my final thought about it in a compliment to you guys, I think what was so special in that run of scenes was, you got a real laugh when Deb says, so I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going to butcher these lines. But when she says, I can't be woke, I'm exhausted. And I think there is something really funny about that, very relatable. But then at the same time, she comes out of that scene and she does go and take accountability. And I think that Jean is incredible in those two moments because in one, she's being stubborn and doubling down, being vulnerable, saying, I'm trying to change, but this is too much. I can't carry this forward. And then in the next moment, really digging down and doing the work and opening herself up. And it's not like she puts a bow on it and is going to be perfect from there on out. But I think that kind of level of frustration and honesty and grappling, but then reaching for grace, whether you get there, is frankly something I wish for our entire world these days. And so you're making a show about world peace. On that note, we will get up and leave. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.